The winter dusk pressed low over the quiet town, its air brittle with the scent of smoke from chimneys and the faint tang of frost. At the edge of the police station's lot, where the sodium streetlights struggled against the gathering dark, a German shepherd sat rigid, chest heaving, its jaws clamped around a bundle of cloth. The dog's coat was muddied, the fur on its legs stiff with something darker than water. Its eyes, steady, unblinking, were locked on the glass doors of the station as though waiting for someone to notice. A torn shirt, shredded along one side and stained by weather and something harder to name, dangled from its mouth like a flag of silent distress. Inside, Officer Malik Hassan had just slipped off his cap, rubbing a hand over thinning hair damp with the day's strain. At 61, years on the force had etched a quiet patience into his manner. He wasn't quick to leap at noise or fuss anymore, preferring the slow wait of observation. When the front desk clerk muttered that a stray's making a mess outside, Malik stepped to the window, his shoulders stiffening when he saw the shepherd. There was no bark, no restless pacing, just the still presence of an animal that seemed to carry a message in its teeth. He walked out slowly, boots crunching over salt scattered across the concrete. The wind bit at his knuckles as he drew closer, but the dog didn't retreat. Instead, it rose to its feet, a soft, hoarse whine slipping from its throat. The shirt's torn fabric fluttered in the cold air. Malik noticed the tag stitched into the collar, half torn away, smeared too badly to read. He crouched, not extending his hand, just letting his breath ease into the space between them. The dog's eyes flicked to his, a brief spark of recognition or urgency that unsettled him more than any growl could have. Something about the garment tugged at his memory. Not the pattern, not the faint scent carried on the fibers, but the sheer human intimacy of a shirt being carried like prey. Malik had worked missing persons before, had been handed photos of clothing recovered from riverbanks and thickets, yet never had an animal delivered one to his door. He straightened, his knees aching, and the shepherd stepped forward, pressing the shirt against his shin as if insisting he take it. The fabric clung damp against his trouser leg, heavy with a weight far beyond its threads. A younger officer pushed through the door, laughter still on his breath from some inside joke. His words caught in his throat when he saw the shirt, his gaze darting between Malik and the dog. "You think that's from—" He didn't finish. The shepherd shifted, ears tilting toward the far side of the street where shadows pressed deep into the line of trees. Its body angled as if ready to lead. Malik held the shirt now, fingers tracing its uneven tiers. He noticed a button half wrenched from its stitch, a thread hanging loose like a severed nerve. The cold deepened, or perhaps it was just the sensation crawling through his chest. He looked at the shepherd, its chest rising in rapid rhythm, and realized it hadn't once glanced at food wrappers tossed by the curb or the open trash bin nearby. This wasn't hunger. This was insistence. The town behind him hummed with ordinary life, children's laughter spilling from a nearby house, a television glowing faint through curtains, the faint jingle of a shop door closing. But here, in the thin space between light and shadow, something else pressed close. Malik's gaze drifted toward the tree line where the dog's ears remained fixed. The air seemed to thicken, as though carrying a silence not yet explained. He folded the shirt carefully, tucking it beneath his arm, the fabric leaving a chill against his uniform. "Show me," he said softly, though whether to the shepherd or to himself he wasn't certain. The dog's tail lifted, not in joy but in readiness, and it padded toward the darkness with a gait that was deliberate, almost ritual. Malik followed, boots crunching, each step heavy with the weight of what might lie waiting in the brittle woods beyond the last street lamp's reach. The shepherd didn't look back, and in that absence of reassurance, Malik felt the first stirrings of unease, an instinct that whatever they were about to find would not let this night end quietly. The path into the trees narrowed quickly, branches knitting overhead to strangle what little light the street lamps had offered. Officer Malik's boots pressed into the frozen earth, the sound muffled by damp leaves. The German shepherd moved ahead, steady but tense, its head low, ears pricked, each step deliberate. Malik noted the faint drag in its right hind leg, an old wound or perhaps something fresh concealed beneath the mud. The animal didn't falter, though. It pressed on as if each stride were weighted with purpose. The forest smelled of iron and moss, a raw mix that raised the hair at the back of Malik's neck. Somewhere in the distance an owl's call broke, then vanished, leaving silence thick enough to make breath sound intrusive. The air shifted colder, sharper, carrying the metallic tang of something not quite natural. The shirt beneath his arm seemed heavier, as if demanding to be remembered with every step. They reached a clearing where the ground dipped into a shallow ravine. The shepherd halted, its body rigid, nose testing the air. Malik followed its gaze downward. There, caught against a bramble, hung another piece of fabric, smaller, darker, torn from the same shirt. It fluttered weakly with the evening wind, a fragment snagged like a warning left behind. Malik crouched, his gloves brushing away the thorns to free the scrap. His chest tightened when he realized the edges bore no clean rip but the jagged mark of something violent. The dog whined, the sound cutting through the stillness like a splinter of grief. It stepped closer, brushing its body against Malik's leg, not in comfort but in insistence. Its fur was colder now, the mud clumped along its side, breaking to reveal a faint streak of red near its flank. Malik drew a breath through clenched teeth. The animal wasn't merely a messenger, it had been part of whatever unfolded here. A branch cracked behind them. Malik straightened, his hand unconsciously brushing the radio at his belt. But the shepherd swung its head sharply, not toward the noise but toward the opposite side of the ravine. Its stare fixed on the shadows, ears rigid, chest heaving with a low growl that trembled more like warning than aggression. Malik followed its gaze and saw nothing, only the dense lattice of trunks and undergrowth swaying faintly in the wind. Yet the silence pressed thicker, the kind that doesn't arrive without cause. For a moment, Malik's instincts as an officer clashed with something older, less rational, the sense that he was standing at the edge of a story not his own, pulled into a script written in dirt and blood. The shepherd moved first, stepping down the slope into the ravine. Its limp was more pronounced now, but its determination remained unbroken. Malik hesitated, then followed, his hand tightening around the folded shirt as though it could anchor him against the uncertainty. At the bottom, where the earth held the dampness of old rain, Malik noticed impressions, shallow, irregular marks pressed into the soil. Not the deep treads of boots, but lighter, uneven scuffs as though someone had stumbled or been dragged. The shepherd lowered its head, sniffing, then sat abruptly, its body coiled in a stillness that felt unnatural, waiting. Malik crouched beside the impressions, tracing them with his gloved finger. They veered toward the trees again, swallowed quickly by the undergrowth. Something in the trail didn't align with his first assumption. The spacing suggested not one set of feet, but two, uneven in rhythm. Whoever wore the torn shirt hadn't been alone. Malik's mouth dried as he realized the second set of prints was smaller, lighter, different in stride altogether. The shepherd shifted, letting out a soft huff of breath, its eyes glinting when they caught the dim light. Malik looked at the animal's flank again, the faint cut weeping slowly through the matted fur. Whatever encounter it had endured wasn't random. It had brushed close against the same violence that had shredded the fabric and left those staggered prints in the soil. The cold deepened, mist curling low in the ravine, brushing against Malik's boots like a slow tide. He tucked the second scrap of fabric into his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly. The shepherd rose again, nudging forward as if to continue the path. Yet for the first time, Malik felt the weight of hesitation press hard in his chest. This was no longer about a stray bringing a curious find to the station. This was a trail bending toward something far more deliberate, and he was no longer certain whether he was following evidence or being led into its design. The shepherd paused at the edge of the trees, one paw raised, its gaze locked into the dark beyond. Malik realized in that instant that he was standing at a threshold. To return would leave questions unasked, but to go forward meant stepping into a story that was already steeped in blood and silence. The air held still, waiting for his choice. The dog slipped between the trees without hesitation, paws silent on the brittle carpet of frost-stiffened leaves. Malik followed, the torn shirt still pressed under his arm, each step taking him further from the comforting glow of the street lamps. The woods were not deep, but in the half-light they seemed older than they were, their bare branches locking together overhead in crooked arches. A crow startled at their approach, wings cracking the silence before vanishing into the dusk. The shepherd did not flinch, nor did it break stride. Its posture was lean, urgent, as though the very air was pulling it forward. The terrain changed quickly. The ground dipped where rain had cut shallow rivulets. still glistening faintly under the moon's uncertain light. Malik caught himself stumbling once, steadying with a hand against a trunk, the rough bark cold beneath his palm. When he looked up, the shepherd had stopped ahead, its body angled low. A sound reached him, faint, metallic, out of place. At first, he thought it was just the old fencing wire that farmers sometimes abandoned in the brush, but the rhythm of it was too deliberate, a dull, intermittent clang, as if something moved against steel. He drew closer, and the scene revealed itself in fragments. A collapsed campsite, little more than a ring of ashes and half-burned wood, lay at the clearing's edge. Nearby, half buried in leaves, was a backpack torn open, its contents scattered. A shoe, a crushed tin of beans, pages of a notebook blurred by damp. The dog circled the mess once, nose low, then moved to the side where the ground dipped into a shallow gully. Malik's breath tightened as he followed, because what glinted in the gully was not just water. A bicycle, its frame twisted, lay half-submerged in the mud. The front wheel bent inward like a broken wrist. Against it, caught and sagging, was a strip of chain-link fencing. And there, snagged among the wire, Malik saw fabric, another piece of clothing, pale and ragged, its edge stiff with dried stains. The shepherd pressed its nose against the fabric, whined low, then stepped back, its tail stiff as a rod. Malik crouched, his knees protesting, and touched the cloth. The cold fibers crumbled slightly in his hand, and as he pulled it free, he saw something else half hidden beneath the mud, a wallet, swollen with damp. He pried it open. Inside, the faint shape of an ID card emerged, edges blurred and water-warped. He could not yet make out the name, but the face, though distorted, stirred a vague unease in him. It wasn't recognition, but something heavier, the sense of staring into a life interrupted. The shepherd gave a sharp bark, startling him. It had turned away from the gully, ears pricked, body tense. Malik followed its gaze into the darker fringe of the woods. A hush settled, pressing deeper than before, broken only by the faint rattle of the bicycle's frame in the wind. For the first time since leaving the station, Malik felt the urge to turn back. But the shepherd's stance, rigid, waiting, held him there. He tucked the wallet into his coat, the shirt still clutched tight, and moved forward. Each step carried him into heavier silence. The ground was softer here, giving way under his boots, and the air held a sour, metallic edge. Ahead, the shepherd stopped abruptly, body lowering almost to the ground. Malik squinted into the dim light and caught the outline of something unnatural against the soil. At first, it looked like a mound of leaves. Then, as his eyes adjusted, the shape resolved into what remained of a shallow pit, its covering scattered by the wind. The soil was loose, recently disturbed, and in its center protruded a length of fabric, denim, stiff and pale. Malik froze, his hand tightening unconsciously around the shirt he carried. The shepherd whined again, not with fear, but with the strained urgency of an animal that had delivered its message and could not make him understand quickly enough. The drizzle began lightly, almost unnoticed, speckling the leaves overhead. Each drop seemed to echo against the quiet, like whispers pressing in. Malik's throat was dry, though the air was damp. He bent closer, the denim's edge clearer now, its texture frayed by soil. This was no accident. Whoever, or whatever, lay here had been placed deliberately. The shepherd stepped forward, nose nearly touching the ground at the pit's edge before retreating again, its ears flat. Malik stood, his breath clouding the air, a pulse of unease striking deeper than shock. The torn shirt under his arm no longer felt like evidence alone. It felt like a fragment of something much larger, something that had been carried to his hands for a reason he had yet to name. Behind him, a branch snapped in the woods, too clean and sharp to be wind. Malik turned, heart kicking hard, but saw nothing but the trees standing still, their limbs slick with rain. The shepherd bristled, a low growl rumbling deep in its chest. Whatever lay waiting in these woods was not finished with them yet. The woods pressed closer as Malik followed, the crunch of his boots muted under the weight of frost-thickened leaves. The shepherd moved with a low, deliberate stride, its body tense, nose cutting through the air as though each scent told a story only it could read. A pale fog hung low among the trunks, curling around their knees, softening the edges of every shadow until distance and depth blurred. Malik adjusted the shirt under his arm, the damp fabric pressing chill into his ribs, his breath steady but shallow. They had not gone far when the shepherd halted abruptly. Its ears angled forward, its chest heaving in short bursts, and then it lowered itself almost to the ground. Malik stilled too, his eyes tracking past the animal to the shapes breaking through the mist. At first he thought it was nothing, just brambles caught in the half-light, but then he saw the pattern. A circle of disturbed earth, soil clawed and scattered as though something had thrashed desperately against it. In the center, half-buried, was another piece of fabric. This one wasn't torn like the shirt. It was folded in upon itself, clumped with soil as though pressed there with purpose. Malik crouched, his joints stiff, and brushed back the loose dirt. A sleeve emerged, smaller than the one he carried, the cloth smudged but intact. A child's garment. His chest tightened, his breath rough in the back of his throat. The shepherd made a low, muffled sound, a whine that bordered on a growl, and pushed its muzzle against the sleeve. For a moment Malik thought it might tear it free, but instead the dog backed away, sitting heavily as though the discovery had drained it. Above them, the branches rattled in a thin wind. Malik tilted his head upward, the sound too precise for breeze alone. His eyes searched, and there it was, the faint flash of movement between trunks. Not the dog, not a person. A shape, broad-shouldered, slipping back into cover with the effortless glide of something at home in silence. His instinct screamed to follow, but his body held still, waiting, listening. The shepherd rose again, hackles faintly lifted, though its stance was not aggressive. It was cautious, reading the air. He lifted the small garment into his hands. Threads clung to his glove, frayed along the edges as though wrenched loose. Yet the soil packed into its folds suggested it hadn't simply been lost. It had been placed, pressed down into the ground as if to hide. Malik turned slowly, scanning the tree line, the fog swallowing shapes before he could resolve them. The shepherd let out one bark, sharp, startling, then fell silent. The sound carried, echoing deeper into the wood, and somewhere far off another noise responded. Not canine, not human, but a heavy snap of wood followed by a rush of displaced air. Malik straightened, his grip firm around the fabric. His pulse thudded hard against his ribs. The dog pressed closer now, shoulder brushing his leg, its presence less a guide than a companion facing whatever stood beyond their sight. For a long moment, nothing moved. The trees stood still, the mist hung unbroken, and the only sound was Malik's breath alongside the faint rasp of the shepherd's lungs. Then, without warning, the dog stepped ahead, paw striking against a length of bark half buried in leaves. It wasn't bark at all. It was the splintered haft of wood, edges darkened, smelling faintly metallic when Malik bent low enough to catch it. His hand lingered, mind racing. It wasn't just a forest floor. It was a place of interruption, a struggle carved into soil and wood. He looked back at the animal. Its eyes held his, steady, urging without force. And for the first time, Malik realized that what the shepherd had carried wasn't an accident of loyalty or scavenging. It was testimony. Each object it brought was a breadcrumb, each gesture a thread of something larger, something darker. The fog thickened then, rolling in as if to seal the space behind them. Malik tucked the child's sleeve into his jacket pocket, the weight of it far heavier than its size. He glanced once more at the tree line where that broad shadow had vanished, a place now quiet, too quiet. He took a step forward, then stopped, not because of fear, but because he understood that the next move, whether to follow, to retreat, or to call for others, would change everything. The shepherd remained at his side, no longer leading, no longer guiding. It was waiting too, watching him, its breath clouding in the cold air. Between them lay the disturbed earth, the fabric, the splintered wood, each one a fragment, each one demanding to be assembled into something he wasn't sure he wanted to see. A faint drizzle began, thin drops tapping against leaves overhead, streaking through the air like hesitant fingers. It mirrored the unease in his chest, each droplet carrying a weight of unfinished meaning. Malik let the moisture soak into his brow and stayed still, suspended in that fragile pause where decision hovered but had not yet been claimed. The drizzle thickened into a soft rain, falling steady and fine, blurring the air until forest and fog seemed to merge. Malik stood beneath the dripping canopy, the child's sleeve still folded inside his jacket, the torn shirt pressed under his arm. The shepherd waited in silence, no longer restless, no longer urging forward. It simply sat, its body damp, its gaze fixed not on him but on the disturbed earth where the struggle had marked the soil. That gaze carried its own truth. The dog had not brought him here for rescue, nor for vengeance, but for witness. Malik exhaled slowly, the breath leaving his chest as though the weight of years pressed it down. He looked again at the sleeve, the faint pattern still visible despite the mud. It was not random, not discarded. It was chosen, set aside, placed deliberately. He had mistaken urgency for threat, desperation for danger. The shepherd had carried its burden because no one else could, because silence in this place would have meant forgetting. The truth was simpler and harder than he wanted. What had happened here could not be undone, but it could be seen. The dog shifted closer, brushing against his leg, not in demand, but in quiet solidarity. Malik's hand lowered, resting gently on its damp fur. He felt the tremor of exhaustion beneath the muscle, the toll of days spent searching, carrying, returning. The shepherd was not seeking reward. It was laying down its duty. He thought of the torn shirt, of how it had arrived at the station without a sound, delivered like a confession. Not anger, not mourning, simply the last tether to a life interrupted. The forest held its breath. No movement stirred among the trees now, no shape lingering in the mist. Whatever shadow he had glimpsed before was gone, leaving only the damp hush of branches heavy with rain. Malik understood then that pursuit was no longer the point. The moment had shifted. His role was not to hunt what had left its mark here, but to carry forward what remained. He folded the sleeve more carefully, tucking it into his pocket. Not as evidence alone, but as a fragment of someone's memory restored to human hands. The shepherd rose, shaking water from its coat, droplets scattering in arcs before vanishing into the soil. It walked to the edge of the clearing, then paused, turning once to look back. There was no plea in its eyes, no command. Only the quiet dignity of an animal that had done what it came to do. Malik felt a tightening in his chest, not from grief, but from the clarity of acceptance. Some stories end not with answers, but with a presence that insists we do not turn away. The rain softened. Mist drifted low across the ground, sliding between roots and stones, carrying with it the scent of earth newly opened. Malik let the dog move on, its figure fading slowly into the pale veil of drizzle. It did not run, did not linger, but disappeared at its own pace, leaving only paw prints darkening in the wet soil until even they dissolved. Malik stood alone, the fabric pressed against him, the memory of the animal's steady gaze imprinted more deeply than any words. He knew that when he returned, when he laid these fragments on the desk beneath the hard lights of the station, they would speak not of resolution, but of responsibility. What the shepherd had revealed was not a case to be closed, but a truth to be held. That was the weight it had carried to his door, and the weight he now carried within himself. The wind shifted then, gentle, lifting loose rain from the leaves, stirring the surface of the earth where the struggle had left its scars. Malik watched as droplets slid down bark and vanished into the soil, as if the forest itself absorbed what had been witnessed. Nothing cried out, nothing demanded notice. Yet the silence was not emptiness. It was remembrance. He turned back toward the faint glow of town beyond the trees, his steps deliberate, the damp fabric secure beneath his arm. Behind him, the clearing grew still, holding its secrets but no longer unseen. The shepherd's path was gone now, swallowed by rain and mist, leaving only the quiet impression of loyalty fulfilled.